Hey everybody, welcome back. This is part 26 of the ongoing Minneapolis-Moline prototype tractor number X231 restoration series, and it's finally time to start assembling some of the gear train components into these castings. So in this video I'm going to start with installing the production pinion shaft into the prototype case and also making the prototype gear set work on the shaft. Sounds like it should be simple because, as I've explained already, the production and prototype components are like 90% similar, but it's that last 10% of difference that causes 90% of the work. And I've already identified two different problems I'm going to have to overcome to make the production shaft not only fit in the case, but also work with the gear set. So with that said, let's get started. Okay, I got both shafts out on the bench. Here's the old one from X231 and the new 10A shaft that I need to use in place of it. So first order of business is to find new bearings to fixture this production shaft in that prototype housing. And you can see X231's bearings had definitely seen better days. So fortunately, both these shafts have the same 2.062 diameter shoulder for the bearing that's up by the gear. So I just needed to go off the numbers that were stamped in the original cone and cup. And I found a Timken 3767 cone, brand new, pretty common size. And also a Timken 3732 cup, also a pretty common size. So that was no big deal right there. We're good on the gear end. The front end was a little different story. The cup was pretty easily found. Again, another common size. We got a Timken 14276. That was no problem, but where I had an issue was the inside diameter of the cone here. If you see, the shouldered portion on the prototype shaft is 1.250 in diameter, or in other words, 1.25 inches, whereas the shouldered portion on the production shaft is 1.375 or 1 3/8. So the old bearing will not fit on the production shaft. That kind of gave me some problems, so I fired up Google, started punching in numbers, had interchange manuals all over the place, and I came up with this one, Timken 14137A, and it's just it's going to be a perfect fit because this cone was made to fit right in the 14276 cup, and it also has the proper 1 3/8 inside diameter so that it will fit right on the production shaft. So thanks to this little bearing right here, my current plan stays in place. So what I'm going to have to do, get the old shaft out of here and the old bearings. Next step is to get this rear pinion bearing pressed onto the shouldered portion of the new shaft. So that bearing pressed on nicely, really happy with how it fit. And next step now is I'm going to do a trial run assembly of the gears on this lower shaft while everything is accessible and out on the bench here, and I'm not working down inside that transmission case and fighting and trying to check clearances and all that. It pays just to do that out in the open here where it's going to be easy. And we're using the good old 10X gears. So finally we've got X231 components going back together. So the first thing that happens is this large first gear slides onto the shaft and butts right up against the bearing. That's followed by this thrust washer. Goes right down to there. And then this snap ring goes on, fits in the groove down there, and it should secure the gear and the washer in place. Next, this sliding double gear goes on, and this one aligns with the splines and will mesh with these inside teeth on the first gear. Okay guys, so assembly up to this point has been pretty much what a standard production 445 wheel tractor would have been. But next up is third gear, and this is where X231 kind of has a differing design. You can see I have this snap ring pre-positioned in the groove on the shaft. That is one of the retaining rings for the third gear. And I'll bring the prototype pinion shaft back into play here real quick. I just mentioned this snap ring here, which I have installed. This is the corresponding groove where that ring would have been on X231. But you can see this groove right here is not present on the prototype shaft, and neither is this groove. It's also not there. We do have similarly cut grooves out on the ends, but we also have a little bit of a difference. The groove on the production shaft is about 40 thousandths further out toward the end than the groove is on the prototype shaft. So I wanted to show you guys those details because this is where my next little problem comes into play. So we'll go ahead and position the third gear on the shaft, if I can line those splines up, till it stops against the snap ring. Now a production 445 tractor would have had another snap ring right here to retain this gear, so it would have had a ring on each side of it with nothing on this part of the shaft, but then another snap ring would have been put on right here, and then the second gear would slide on, and finally the last snap ring would fix the entire assembly, and everything would be secured to the shaft. Well, X231 did not have these two grooves here. Instead, they just used this sleeve spacer to go between the third gear and the second gear. If I can position that, there we go. Now I mentioned in the last video the center hub on this second gear was a little bit shallower than the hub on the corresponding production gear by about 20 thousandths. So you see what I'm getting at here? Between the shallower hub depth on this prototype gear combined with the snap ring groove on the production shaft being about 40 thousandths further out, that's going to give me about 60 thousandths in play on these two gears on this whole stack assembly right here. I'll pop the snap ring on there and then I'll give you a better visual of what I'm talking about. Alright, so to better represent what I'm talking about, snap ring is in place. You can see I got a little bit of a gap there between the ring and the gear. Everything is bottomed on the lower ring right here, spacer in place. And you can see the type of end plate I have on there, which is no good. And it also creates a bunch of slack in here on the spacers. So with that kind of end play, this gear, and this spacer can all kind of be floating around a bit on the shaft, and I don't like that. The spacer is also kind of a loose and sloppy fit on there anyway, almost like it was kind of an afterthought kind of thing. So I've got two options. I can utilize the snap ring groove that's on the production shaft in front of third gear, and also utilize the one that's behind second gear to kind of use the production setup to have two rings supporting each gear, which would be stronger. But then I'd have to make some sort of a thrust washer to go behind the snap ring on the front here to take up the slack between second gear and the retaining ring, and I don't really like that. I think a better option would be rather to keep the prototype design with the spacer in between. Granted, just having one snap ring on each end of that stack assembly is going to be a little weaker, but I figure this held together well enough to blow the tractor rear end up once. So for being a parade tractor trailer queen from here on out, I'm just going to make a slightly taller spacer to go in between these, so I can butt third gear up against that ring, second gear up against the front ring, and have a pretty good assembly without any end play. So got this old piece of round stock here. I think I can see a new spacer in there somewhere. I just need to dig it out. Let's go over to the lathe. Let's find it. Okay, here's the new sleeve spacer. It differs from the old one in a couple of ways. First, obviously, it's about a 1/16 of an inch taller to take up that end play. And I also made the wall thickness a little bit greater on it because this one was kind of a sloppy fit on the shaft. The new one, I'm pretty happy with how it fits, just barely a click there, whereas the old one is, you can see, really loose on there. So we'll fit second gear back on, reinstall the snap ring, and then check our clearance. Alright, let's test it out. Snap ring is in place. We'll check these gears for end play, and really nothing. They're being held in place very well, yet they're not so tight that I can't still spin that center spacer sleeve. So really happy with how all that turns out, and I really like how everything fits a lot better than before. So now we have a very good lower transmission shaft and gear set assembly, and everything not only fits but fits well. Got all the prototype gears on the production shaft. and I sure am glad I went through all of this out on the bench before I tried sticking this down in the bottom of that transmission case. So now we have the gear set. We know it's good to go. New bearing is on the pinion shaft. That's good to go. Next step now, get these new races installed down in the transmission case. Okay, so with that done, I just need to finish putting a light coating of oil on the bearings, and then I'll be ready to install the pinion shaft in that transmission housing. I'm not going to put the gears on it quite yet, though. I'll get this put in, and then I'll explain why. So there it is. Who would have thought it would have taken all that work just to get this solitary shaft installed down in the bottom of this case? But we made the production shaft fit, and we also verified that the gear set is going to work on it as well. I have the bearings drawn up to the required 10 to 20 inch-pounds of preload. In other words, rotational torque required to turn the pinion. That ensures that all the end play is taken up and your pinion holds a solid center line for ring gear adjustment. And as to the reason why I chose not to put those gears on the shaft at this point is because I'm still not 100% sure that all this stuff is going to fit, these production parts. And even if they do fit, there's a chance I may still have to take that shaft back out and possibly do some shimming beneath bearings or behind races to increase or decrease my pinion depth into the ring gear when I try and get the proper backlash and contact pattern set up. So in my mind, putting those gears on would be just putting the cart a little bit ahead of the horse at this point. So I'd rather keep that shaft just clean, nothing on it. That way, if I do have to take things back apart and do any adjustments, it's going to be a lot less work than having to fool with all those gears and snap rings and spacers and all that stuff. So in my mind, it makes sense. Hopefully it does to you guys. Next step now is getting that ring gear placed in that rear end housing and getting the bevel shaft and the bolt pinions and the bearings and everything set up, shim packs, end plates, all that stuff. I'm going to roll right on into that, get going on that. So basically, long story short, my main goal right now is to ensure I can get a good contact pattern and a good mesh with these production ring and pinions in these prototype housings. Until I know that I can do that, nothing else is going in these pieces. So that's the primary goal right now. Guys, as always, thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, comment below. Hope to see you back for the next installment.